What if I told you that Meghan Markle's name was whispered behind closed palace doors, not in admiration, not in envy, but in accusation? What if Prince Andrew, in a private and desperate conversation, dragged her into his own royal reckoning? What if King Charles, weary from scandal, betrayal, and endless media wars, finally said, "Enough," and Meghan's entire future shifted in a heartbeat? No tabloid would dare print it. No royal reporter could confirm it. But something has changed. The silence from Buckingham Palace isn't just ominous, it's strategic. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the woman pulling the strings behind the velvet curtains? Not Camilla, not even King Charles, but Catherine, the once shy duchess who has evolved into the monarchy's stealth commander-in-chief. This story doesn't begin with Andrew's confession. It doesn't even begin with Meghan's Netflix empire, the podcast PR spins, or the Montecito memoir tours. It begins with a moment, a single, abrupt shift. October 17th, 2025. The date Prince Andrew finally relinquished the title he'd clung to like a lifeline. Duke of York. Why that day? Why now, after years of defiance, silence, and carefully crafted statements? Because something behind the scenes shattered the status quo. And it wasn't just Andrew's legal liabilities. It was a name. A whispered name. Meghan. And the moment Charles heard it, everything changed. Let's rewind. Prince Andrew has long been a royal liability. His association with the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has plagued the firm for over a decade. There were the damning interviews, the settlements, the public ridicule. And through it all, Andrew maintained a quiet resistance. Yes, he stepped back. But the titles? The perks? The access? He never truly let go. Until now. Except, he didn't go quietly. Not at all. Sources say that before the official announcement, Andrew requested a private audience with his older brother, King Charles III. A final attempt to explain himself. To salvage something. To make a deal. But what was said in that room didn't stay there. Because days later, something began to leak. Slowly, strategically, through whispers, winks, and anonymous palace sources. That Meghan Markle's name had been brought up. By Andrew. Directly. The implications were staggering. Was he deflecting? Pointing fingers to save face? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Something the monarchy could no longer ignore? Now pause for a moment. Why would a disgraced prince, facing public exile, name Meghan Markle in a private conversation with the king? What could she possibly have to do with Andrew's title removal? That's the question that sent royal insiders into a frenzy. And that's the question we're going to unravel today. Because once Andrew opened that door, everything spilled through. Old wounds, buried secrets, power plays that have been simmering beneath the royal surface for years. And standing in the middle of the storm? Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, now Princess of Wales, was no longer playing the quiet game. Behind the scenes, she had been gathering power, building influence, and quietly rising. And when Charles hesitated, when he debated how to handle Andrew, how to contain Meghan, Catherine made her move. But before we get to that twist, you need to understand just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Because this isn't just a scandal. This is a reckoning. Let's talk strategy. Royal strategy. Because everything in the House of Windsor is calculated. Every handshake, every photo op, every silence. So when Andrew gave up the Duke of York title, the palace released a statement that felt sterile. After ongoing discussions, and in light of public interest, His Royal Highness the Duke of York will no longer use the title effective immediately. No emotion, no apology, no context, just a surgical extraction. But within hours, headlines started connecting dots. Online forums lit up. Twitter exploded. Why now? What changed? And why was Meghan trending alongside Andrew? It didn't make sense until someone remembered a leaked excerpt from a royal aide's memoir. A passage that hinted at a tension-filled meeting months prior where Charles allegedly said, "We must sever all ties that could damage the institution, even if they are familial." Who was he talking about? Some assumed Andrew, but others? They pointed to a far more complicated target, Meghan. Because as Andrew's relevance crumbled, Meghan's profile skyrocketed. TV shows, lifestyle brands, streaming deals. But with visibility came scrutiny. And suddenly, Whispers began circulating about overlapping acquaintances, shared donors, and questionable event circles. All the glitzy soirees, Hollywood fundraisers, and progressive networking spaces that blurred the lines between fame, activism, and royalty. It wasn't guilt by association. It was guilt by optics. And in the monarchy, optics are everything. Now ask yourself this. What if Andrew's confession wasn't about direct involvement, but about vulnerability? What if he simply said, "If I'm being scrutinized for my relationships, why isn't she?" What if that one sentence turned Charles's mind from pity to paranoia? After all, Charles had already been burned by his son Harry and Meghan's explosive claims. The Oprah interview, the memoir, the Netflix series. The Sussexes had become unpredictable. And now, Andrew, desperate and cornered, was suggesting that Meghan could become an even greater liability, that she might already be one. What was Charles supposed to do? Ignore it? Or prepare for the worst? Because here's the thing about monarchs, they rarely act on emotion. They act on survival. And Charles was now fighting to preserve the monarchy's reputation after decades of scandal and erosion. So he did what monarchs do. He sacrificed. He sacrificed Andrew publicly. And, behind the scenes, he started tightening the leash on Meghan. But he didn't do it alone. Because as the media fed on Andrew's collapse, another figure emerged. Not with grand speeches, but with quiet authority. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was no longer just a figurehead. She had been watching, waiting, calculating. And when the time came, she made it clear. The monarchy needed a future queen with backbone. And she wasn't going to let Meghan rewrite the royal script. Not again. So where does that leave us? With a monarchy at war within itself. Andrew's confession was the match. Meghan's looming shadow is the fuel. And Catherine? She just might be the fire. But don't mistake this for a simple scandal. This is a chessboard. And each player has their eye on the throne. Not literally, but symbolically. Because in the new era of media, perception is power. Titles can be stripped. But public narrative? That's far harder to control. And as we begin this deep dive, one question will haunt every chapter. Who is really in control? Charles, Meghan, Andrew, or Catherine? Because one of them just changed the game. And the next move? It might bring down the entire house. What does it take to bring down a royal? Not just silence him, not just exile him, but strip him of a title so entwined with identity, history, and legacy that its removal feels like severing a limb? For Prince Andrew, the so-called spare's spare, the answer was always supposed to be nothing. He was untouchable, entitled, royal by blood, protected by the invisible walls of privilege, protocol, and palace silence. Until now. Because on October 17, 2025, after years of scandal, whispers, failed interviews, settlements, and a flailing PR resurrection tour, he fell. Hard. Publicly. Irrevocably. And what the world didn't see, what they weren't supposed to hear, is what he told his brother, King Charles III, behind closed doors just days before. Something so unexpected, so destabilizing, that it changed the entire course of the monarchy's strategy. But before we get to that moment, we need to understand just how far Andrew fell, and how he nearly brought others down with him on the way. The title Duke of York wasn't just ceremonial. It was a legacy, worn by kings, inherited by history, etched into centuries of British aristocracy. It was given to Andrew by Queen Elizabeth II in 1986, on his wedding day to Sarah Ferguson. And despite everything that followed, the scandals, the divorce, the headlines, it remained his. A symbol of resilience. Or arrogance, depending on whom you ask. Now imagine being forced to give it up. Not by the public, not by the media, but by your own brother. That's not just humiliation. That's betrayal. At least, in Andrew's eyes. Which is why, on the morning of October 14th, when he received a summons from the palace, he reportedly reacted with fury. According to insiders close to Sandringham, he paced his estate for hours. No formal schedule was given. No reason. Just a line from the king's private secretary. His Majesty requests your presence. No aides. No security. Just family. Andrew knew. It was coming. But he had one last card to play. Inside Clarence's house, the tone was icy. Charles, already weakened by months of internal tension, Harry's memoir fallout, Camilla's PR disaster in the Middle East, and declining poll numbers, sat waiting. The monarch who had spent his life in his mother's shadow now faced the crumbling legacy of his own reign. And Andrew, slumped but still defiant, walked in with what many believe was a final plea, or a warning. "I'll go," he allegedly began. "I'll step down, but I won't go alone." Those in the room say Charles's expression didn't flinch. He simply waited. "There's a reason I'm being sacrificed," Andrew continued. "Because the others are more dangerous, more visible, and you're too afraid to touch them." Charles reportedly raised a brow. "Who?" And that's when it happened. The name. The bombshell. The unexpected deflection. Meghan. Was it a bluff? A manipulation tactic? A desperate prince trying to drag someone else into the spotlight as he lost his own? Maybe. But something about the way he said it, the tone, the conviction, made Charles pause. "She's more involved than you think," Andrew pressed. "In everything. In the media. In the leaks. Even with Epstein, there were whispers, circles that overlapped. Names I recognized. You think I'm the end of the rot? I was just the beginning." Now stop for a second. Why would Andrew name Meghan? Was he trying to align himself with her downfall? Hoping to buy time by shifting the target? Or did he believe that the palace had allowed one scandal to distract from another? Remember, Andrew had spent years in silence, shunned from public life. But that doesn't mean he wasn't watching, listening, gathering resentment. And Meghan Markle, formerly the Duchess of Sussex, had become the face of rebellion, independence, and global spotlight. But also, suspicion, divisiveness, tabloid obsession. To Andrew, that was leverage. And to Charles, it may have been a moment of hesitation. Because if there was even a fraction of truth in Andrew's insinuation about Meghan's social circle, about Hollywood overlap, about potential embarrassment to the crown, then the problem wasn't just Andrew anymore. It was institutional, and that required a different kind of strategy. The removal of the Duke of York title wasn't spontaneous. It was surgical. Within 72 hours of the meeting, internal royal lawyers were consulted. Titles can't be deleted, but they can be retired, rendered dormant, politely cast into historical limbo. And that's exactly what Charles did. He summoned the Privy Council. He made the statement. He informed Parliament quietly. And then the press release came. Simple, sanitized, deceptive. His Royal Highness the Duke of York will no longer use the title, effective immediately. This decision has been made with the support of the King and the wider royal family. Notice the phrasing? Will no longer use. Not has been stripped. Not has resigned. That's the royal way of saying, we handled it. Move on. But social media didn't move on. Journalists didn't move on. And neither did Meghan. Because as Andrew's name trended worldwide, so did hers. Thanks to a handful of cryptic headlines. Meghan dragged into Duke drama. Prince Andrew allegedly names former Duchess in exit confession. King Charles's internal crisis. Was Meghan caught in the crossfire? And suddenly, what had been a scandal about one disgraced prince became a whisper war between California and Clarence House. And you can bet Meghan noticed. Because by the end of the day, Team Sussex was already asking questions. Was her name used in the decision? Why was she trending alongside Andrew? Who leaked what? And most importantly, is Catherine behind this? But back to Andrew. This wasn't just about losing a title. It was about legacy. Without Duke of York, Andrew is no one. Not in the eyes of royal history. Not in the eyes of protocol. Not in the eyes of the public. He's just Prince Andrew. Scandal-ridden. Wealthy, but unwanted. And completely isolated. The estate he once called a sanctuary, under review. The guards who once flanked his doors, reduced. The friends who once called him for parties, hunts, polo matches, silent. This wasn't exile. It was erasure. And the only person who heard his final gasp of retaliation, the only one who witnessed him drag Meghan into his downfall, was Charles, the king, who, after hearing it all, reportedly said just one thing. Then it's decided. No more titles. No more risks. You're done. But Charles wasn't just talking to Andrew. He was speaking about the entire royal ecosystem. Because Meghan may not have been the target that day, but her name had been spoken. And in royal circles, once a name enters a scandal, especially by association, it rarely escapes untouched. And this time, someone else was listening. Someone who had waited years for this moment. Someone who understood that in every royal scandal, there's an opportunity. And that someone, Catherine. Because as Andrew walked out of Clarence's house for the last time, stripped of a title, burdened by disgrace, Catherine was already preparing her next move. And what she did next, no one expected it, not even Charles. What do you say to a brother who holds your fate in his hands? What do you confess when everything is already crumbling, but you still think you can bargain your way out? And what kind of name do you drop when you're cornered, humiliated, and desperate? Because make no mistake, what happened between Prince Andrew and King Charles behind the sealed doors of Clarence's house wasn't just a conversation. It was a reckoning, and it started with silence. Heavy, awkward, pregnant with history. Two brothers, one now a monarch, the other a disgraced relic, sat facing each other without the buffer of aides, press secretaries, or palace courtiers. This wasn't for public show. This was family business. And Andrew, for once in his life, had no leverage. But he still had one thing to offer. A confession. He didn't start with an apology, because that would have implied guilt. Something Andrew had never truly embraced, even after the infamous BBC interview, even after the Virginia Giuffre settlement, even after being stripped of his public duties. Instead, he tried something else. Appeal. You think this is justice, he said slowly, according to a source close to the meeting. But you're just playing politics. You think taking my title will buy you peace with the press. It won't. I'm not your problem. Charles didn't respond. He waited. And that's when Andrew shifted. His voice reportedly dropped. His tone hardened. If you're going to remove me, then you should know something first. I'm not the only one who's been careless, who's left a trail. Charles, caught between duty and disbelief, asked him what he meant. And Andrew said it plainly. Meghan's involved. Involved in what? The term itself was vague, infuriatingly so. But Andrew, in that moment, didn't offer receipts. He offered implications. The kind of dangerous half-truths that aren't technically lies, but can trigger 1,000 headlines. You want a clean house, Charlie? Then look at the ones you let in. Look at who she brought into the circle. The fundraisers. The Hollywood people. Some of them were at the same parties. Do you know how many names cross over with Epstein's world? I do. I've seen them. Now, let's pause for a moment. Do we know if Andrew was telling the truth? No. But did he believe it? Possibly. Or maybe he just knew that saying Meghan's name would plant a seed of doubt in Charles. A seed that could grow into hesitation, into scrutiny, into action. Because that's what Andrew was doing. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to drag someone else down with him. But why Meghan? Why not Harry, or Camilla, or even the institution itself? Because Meghan represents something more volatile than all of them combined. Unpredictable power. Andrew is scandal. Camilla is controversy. But Meghan? Meghan is chaos. Brand chaos. Media chaos. Royal chaos. She has a direct line to the press. To Hollywood. To Oprah. To Netflix. To Spotify. To the world. And that, to Andrew, was leverage. You think I'm a risk to the monarchy? Wait until she opens another door. Wait until someone asks her the right question on a podcast, and she actually answers. Then came the most loaded line of all. She's not done yet, and you've given her everything she needs to finish the job. Charles reportedly sat in silence. Because this wasn't just about Andrew's paranoia. This was about optics. And if Andrew, deeply disgraced, widely mocked, legally muzzled, was suggesting that Meghan's connections mirrored his own, even tangentially, even by association, then the monarchy's PR wall wasn't just cracked. It was crumbling. So Charles did what monarchs do best when facing uncertainty. He asked for names. Andrew, smirking slightly, allegedly dropped a few. Socialites. Financiers. PR agents. Photographers. A Hollywood fundraiser whose name had once appeared in a now-deleted Epstein flight log. Nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. But enough to make Charles shift uncomfortably. Enough to make him wonder. Had they missed something? In their desperate attempt to preserve dignity, to smooth the family narrative, had they accidentally let another vulnerability in? Was Meghan, knowingly or unknowingly, connected to the same networks that brought Andrew to ruin? Was the Queen's goodwill inherited by someone the monarchy could no longer trust? We may never know what Charles truly believed in that moment, but we know what he did next. He ended the meeting, abruptly, decisively. You will step down, he told Andrew, according to a palace source. This conversation never happened. Your title is gone. But if I hear your name in the press again, especially tied to hers, you'll lose more than your place in the family. You'll lose your protection." That wasn't just a warning. That was a threat. Because even now, Andrew receives quiet financial assistance, a taxpayer-funded security team, palace lawyers when necessary. But that could all vanish overnight. And Charles made it clear, any further damage to the institution, any hint of media sabotage, would result in total abandonment. Andrew had gambled. He lost. But something stuck with Charles. After Andrew left, reportedly fuming, the king ordered an informal background review. Not an investigation, but a connections audit of sorts. His aides were instructed to quietly map out the overlap between Sussex social circles and those once frequented by Andrew and Epstein, just to be sure. And while no direct links emerged, at least publicly, it was enough to reignite an old palace fear. That Meghan's proximity to Hollywood, activism, and global celebrity made her uncontainable. Not corrupt, not criminal, just uncontrollable. And that, in monarchy terms, is just as dangerous. So when Charles approved Andrew's title removal, it wasn't just about accountability. It was about precedent. If a blood prince could be stripped for bad associations and media toxicity, then so could anyone else. Even a duchess in California. Even Meghan. And this is where the story fractures into shadows. Because Meghan's camp had no official knowledge of the confession. It wasn't in the press. There were no tapes. No memos. Just a trail of suspicion. But she knew something had changed. Because on the day Andrew's title was revoked, her name exploded online, not by coincidence, but by algorithm. Comments, rumors, conspiracy threads. Was Meghan really linked to Epstein's circle? Did Andrew name Meghan to save himself? Why hasn't King Charles denied it? And from Montecito, the silence was deafening. No denial, no clarification, no statement, because anything said would only confirm that something had been said. So Meghan waited, watched, and began calling her team, lawyers, publicists, her inner circle, because even if the rumors weren't true, the damage was. And that's when she started planning her response. Not an interview, not a lawsuit, but something more strategic. Something that would remind the world who the real villain was, and who the rising heroine was. Because while Meghan began quietly assembling her defense, Catherine was already preparing her next attack. And this time, she wasn't waiting for permission. What if Meghan Markle wasn't blindsided at all? What if, long before Andrew ever uttered her name, she already knew something was coming? Not because of psychic intuition, not because of royal briefings, but because the walls were closing in and she could feel it. Because Meghan is many things. Polarizing, charismatic, strategic, but above all else, she's observant. And as the media turned their attention back to Prince Andrew, unearthing familiar demons and tabloid chaos, Meghan wasn't relaxing in Montecito. She was reading the patterns. And what she saw terrified her. Because somewhere, buried in the noise of Andrew's downfall, were shadows of her own world. A name here, a party there, a photo she never authorized, a donor she didn't remember meeting, but somehow appeared in an old Epstein-adjacent guest list. Coincidence? Possibly. But in the world Meghan lives in, where every narrative is a weapon and every silence is a trap, coincidence doesn't exist. Let's rewind the timeline. Just days before Andrew's title was removed, Meghan had been preparing for the next public chapter in her empire, her long-teased relaunch of her lifestyle brand. With the cameras fading from her Netflix docuseries and Spotify implosion behind her, she was pivoting hard. As ever, was supposed to be a reset. A soft, feminine, wellness-centric brand rooted in wholesome elegance. Jams, teas, homeware. Simple, safe, strategic. But in the digital age, nothing is safe. And nothing is ever truly simple. Because just as she began teasing her next phase, posting curated Instagram visuals, sitting for glossy photo shoots, floating press leaks about conscious living, and returning to her roots, she got the first call. Not from a friend, not from a palisade, but from a former associate. Someone she hadn't spoken to in years. "Are you watching the news?" they asked. "Of course," Meghan replied. "Then you should know, your name's being passed around again. And not for the right reasons." Meghan froze. Passed around where? London. Whisper circles. Old money. They're tying you to Andrew's mess. It hit her like a punch. Not because she was guilty, but because in the world of optics, being associated is enough. Especially when your brand is clean. When your image is built on empowerment, healing, and transformation. A single headline can shatter it. So she did what anyone in her position would do. She called her lawyers. And what they found was unsettling. Not illegal, not damning, but undeniably problematic. Let's talk about the guest list. Back in 2014, before royal titles, before Frogmore, before Oprah, Meghan had been building her Hollywood network. Actress, humanitarian, blogger, she was the darling of niche circles. Especially high-end philanthropic fundraisers in Los Angeles and New York. One such event, according to an anonymous source, was hosted by a now-defunct PR firm with ties to, well, let's just say murky waters. A hedge fund manager with previous connections to Epstein's network had briefly partnered with the event's media sponsor. Names were shared, photos taken, business cards exchanged. It wasn't a scandal at the time. It wasn't even suspicious. It was normal, until it wasn't. Until years later, those very same names began showing up in lawsuits, in court testimonies, in leaked flight logs, in dossiers buried under non-disclosure agreements. And Meghan? She had no idea. Or did she? That's the question now haunting her legacy. Did Meghan know she had been adjacent to Epstein's orbit, even peripherally? Did she realize how close some of her past connections had come to that toxic gravity? Or had she, like many in the industry, assumed it was just another gray zone in Hollywood, a place where power, money, and ego blur boundaries? Some sources say she was warned, that she had been told to distance herself from certain individuals in 2018 after her engagement. That palace advisors, especially one internal fixer known for vetting royal associations, had flagged a few problematic names. But whether Meghan listened, that's unclear, because by then, she was already married. Already protected, already a duchess. And now, years later, those very names were circling back. But this time, they weren't whispered in private. They were hand-delivered to King Charles by his own brother. And Meghan knew it. Now ask yourself, how does a woman like Meghan respond to being implicated in someone else's downfall? How does she react when the thing she spent years running from, the crown, the scrutiny, the shame, tries to wrap its claws around her again? She doesn't retreat. She redirects. And that's exactly what she did. Within 48 hours of Andrew's title announcement, Meghan's team flooded the digital space with soft distraction content. Photos of her volunteering at a women's shelter. Leaked stories about a potential documentary on healing after trauma. Carefully placed articles emphasizing her distance from royal toxicity. But it wasn't enough. Because social media doesn't forget. And one tweet, from an anonymous but verified insider account, went viral. If Meghan attended parties with people later connected to Epstein, isn't that worth a second look? The tweet had no proof, no names, no context, but it had over 14 million views by midnight. And that's when Meghan knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a hit. The question is, from who? Was it Andrew, still bitter, still deflecting? Was it someone in Charles's camp, trying to consolidate power? Or was it Catherine? Because here's where things get dark. According to palace insiders, Catherine had recently taken a more active role in strategic positioning, a polite phrase for damage control and narrative curation. She had begun aligning herself with figures in the press, not tabloids. Think, serious journalists, establishment voices, the kind that shape headlines, not just repeat them. And through subtle gestures, photo ops with charities, whispered quotes to columnists, even carefully timed public appearances. Catherine was building something dangerous. A clean monarchy. One without scandal. Without excess. Without Meghan. And if that meant letting the Andrew-Meghan association snowball, so be it. But let's be honest. Did Meghan know what she was walking into when she married Harry? Absolutely not. Did she understand the brutal machinery of the firm? Maybe. But did she ever expect to be lumped into the same sentence as a man like Prince Andrew? Never. And that's what makes this chapter so volatile. Because the public loves a redemption arc, but they also love a takedown. And if the palace can't control Andrew and can't silence Meghan, then they'll let the public decide. And if you've ever seen how the British press treats a woman of color who dares to challenge tradition, You already know how that story ends. Or do you? Because what Meghan did next, no one saw coming. Not Catherine, not Charles, not even Andrew. Because Meghan didn't just fight back. She opened the vault, and inside were secrets the monarchy thought they'd buried forever. What happens when the institution that tried to control you becomes your greatest weapon? What happens when a woman cast out by the monarchy realizes the same crown that shunned her can be flipped, twisted, into her most powerful narrative tool? You get Meghan Markle in survival mode. And make no mistake, this isn't about royalty anymore. This is war. A war of perception, of media, of legacy. Because Meghan doesn't just play defense. She plays long game offense. And the moment Prince Andrew dropped her name, the moment King Charles stayed silent, the moment Catherine stepped into the vacuum, Meghan saw it. The opportunity, the chaos, the leverage. And she moved faster than the palace could blink. Let's set the stage. At this point, Meghan's image is under siege. Not from scandalous evidence, but from insinuation, from algorithms, from implication, from a cleverly timed royal media machine that never directly accuses, but always lets others connect the dots. But Meghan? She's a Hollywood product. She knows how to build, and more importantly, how to counter a narrative. So she asked herself the most important question in modern public life. Who gets to control the story? And then she made her decision. She would enter the archive, a vault, not literal, not guarded by men in suits, but digital, emotional, and meticulously preserved. Clips, notes, emails, footage. Because for all the documentaries, interviews, and Spotify content Meghan has already released, there's so much more that the public has never seen. Moments that were cut, testimonies that were softened, names that were blurred, out of caution, out of respect, out of strategy. But now, those moments became ammunition. According to an insider close to Archewell, Meghan had been sitting on unreleased content since late 2022. Footage from the early post-royal escape days. Conversations filmed for Netflix that were too raw at the time. And interviews, hours of interviews, where she spoke about the inner workings of the palace, including people, behaviors, and decisions that were edited out before broadcast. One moment in particular stood out. An off-camera rant, recorded accidentally by a lav mic, where Meghan allegedly said, "They'll protect Andrew forever, but they'll throw me to the wolves because I speak." That moment was never released. But now, it was back on the table, and Meghan knew exactly what to do with it. Meanwhile, back in the UK, the firm was watching. Catherine, especially. Because while Charles remained focused on preserving stability and Camilla retreated into trusted circles, Catherine took action. Subtle, surgical, strategic action. A surprise visit to a domestic violence shelter. A speech on women's empowerment, reminding the world who we are. A photo shoot with Princess Charlotte, branding her as the next generation's pillar of grace. But it wasn't about charity. It was about contrast. Her versus Meghan. The composed future queen versus the unpredictable outsider. The loyal duchess versus the defiant duchess. The perfect mother versus the media-molded rebel. And it worked, briefly. Public sentiment swayed. Commentators leaned into the dichotomy. Catherine is everything Meghan pretended to be. Finally, the crown is in the right hands. But Meghan didn't panic. Because she had something Catherine didn't. Receipts. And one of them could implode everything. It came from a 2019 internal memo, sent by a senior palace staffer, flagging concerns about Andrew's connections, and advising the palace to be cautious about certain events where he, Meghan, and outside guests had intersected. The memo wasn't damning on its own, but it confirmed one explosive thing. That the palace knew there were optics risks, and rather than confront them, they buried it. Why? Because confronting Andrew meant scandal, and confronting Meghan meant admitting she had a point. So they let the memo rot. Until now. Until someone within Meghan's legal team obtained a copy. And Meghan, furious, bruised, but calculating, decided to leak a snippet. Not the whole document. Just a line. Just enough to remind the world. They knew, and they let it happen. The quote went viral within minutes. It read, "Due to overlaps in certain external social networks, we advise caution regarding the Duchess's attendance at upcoming events. Potential for reputational conflation exists." And just like that, the narrative flipped. Meghan wasn't the problem. The palace was. Now pause. Ask yourself, why didn't Meghan go nuclear sooner? Why sit on evidence, footage, and emotional soundbites for this long? Because Meghan believed in the power of perception control. She thought leaving the monarchy would buy her peace. She believed that silence would protect her. But she forgot one thing. Silence doesn't protect you. It isolates you. And when Andrew's name dragged hers into the mud, when Charles looked away, when Catherine smiled for the cameras, Meghan remembered what she learned in Hollywood. Control your image, or someone else will. So she weaponized the one thing the palace never anticipated. Her voice, raw, unfiltered, and loaded. Behind the scenes, Archwell scrambled to repackage the withheld footage into a new pitch. Not a documentary, not a memoir, a docudrama. Working title, Behind the Crown. Hybrid format. Personal commentary mixed with never-before-seen clips. Subtle callouts. Soft dramatizations. Think. Netflix meets Succession meets confessional therapy. And if that wasn't bold enough, the project was pitched to Amazon MGM Studios. Why them? Because Netflix was burnt, Spotify was closed, and Amazon, hungry for prestige drama, hungry for headlines. And let's not forget, Amazon is also where Meghan's former husband Trevor Engelson has quiet connections. Coincidence? Or the ultimate full-circle revenge arc? But here's the masterstroke. The leaked teaser for Behind the Crown didn't attack anyone directly. It showed Meghan walking through a garden, holding a binder, speaking softly to a director. I kept quiet because I didn't want to make it worse. But the truth is, they never wanted me there. And when I left, they made sure I stayed gone. Then a cut to black. Then the words. When they said I didn't belong, they meant it. Boom. The internet exploded. Hashtags. Hashtag she knew. Hashtag Behind the Crown. Hashtag why Meghan left. Hashtag Andrew and the institution. The narrative had changed. Again. And in the palace? Panic. Charles called emergency meetings. Catherine canceled a scheduled appearance. Camilla allegedly broke down in private, warning that another Oprah moment will break the monarchy. But Meghan wasn't coming to Oprah. She was going to streaming platforms, podcasts, social media, all at once. Because this time, she didn't want the truth buried under royal protocol. She wanted it raw. And just as Charles began planning a quiet counter-strategy, just as Catherine began mapping out a charity tour to reset the headlines, just as the monarchy tried to play defense, Meghan did one more thing. She posted a quote. No caption, no hashtags, just a photo of handwritten words on linen stationery. You tried to bury me, but you forgot. I'm the seed. And then she signed it. M. But the story didn't end there. Because the leak of the palace memo, the footage pitch, the streaming whispers, it triggered something Meghan hadn't anticipated. A royal insider, still on the payroll, reached out. An aide who had been in the room during one of the most controversial decisions in modern royal history. And they were ready to speak. Not anonymously, not through lawyers, but publicly, because they had their own confession. One that would expose Meghan, protect Catherine, and blow everything open. What if the most powerful player in the royal family doesn't need a crown? What if, behind every carefully posed family photo and muted pastel dress, lies a mind that has spent decades studying every move, every whisper, every threat? Because while Meghan was preparing a media counterattack, while Andrew was unraveling, while Charles was stuck in the crossfire, Catherine was rising, quietly, deliberately, unapologetically. And what she did behind the scenes didn't just shape the monarchy's future. It may have saved it, or, depending on who you ask, completely rewritten it. Let's go back, before the seed, quote, before the leaks, before the footage deals. While Meghan was rallying her team in California, Catherine was building something far more subtle in London. Not a response, a repositioning. She wasn't going to fight Meghan with words. She wasn't going to fuel the scandal with statements. Because Catherine knows something most royals forget. The firm doesn't need to win headlines. It needs to win legacy. And legacy is earned in silence, in stillness, in surgical image warfare. Weeks before Andrew's title removal, Catherine had already begun recalibrating the monarchy's tone. Gone were the stiff formal portraits and wooden interviews. In came cinematic charity visits, moments of whispered empathy with victims, off-camera jokes with children, spontaneous hugs, but always caught by a waiting photographer's lens. No press releases. No over-explaining. Just images. Because in today's media world, a single photo can rewrite an entire narrative. And Catherine was painting herself as the future, not by saying it, but by becoming it. Now, let's talk about strategy. A few weeks after Andrew's fateful meeting with Charles, Catherine's private secretary, an ex-MI5 communications analyst turned royal operations lead, began circulating a new internal briefing memo titled Stabilization Through Contrast. Its thesis? Let Meghan be the storm. We'll be the anchor. The document laid out a two-part plan. Reframe Catherine as the monarchy's moral center, graceful, composed, unbothered by scandal. Use contrast storytelling. Where Meghan is loud, be quiet. Where she reacts, stay still. Where she speaks, listen. It wasn't passive. It was lethal. And it worked. With Andrew's scandal festering in the headlines and Meghan's name being dragged into the digital trenches, Catherine unveiled her next move. A surprise joint project with Queen Camilla. The two most controversial women in modern royal history, one accused of stealing a crown, the other accused of stealing the spotlight, united for a domestic violence initiative. The optics? Flawless. The symbolism? Crushing. Because while Meghan fought to be heard, Catherine aligned herself with power, with continuity, with forgiveness, with control. Photos of her standing shoulder to shoulder with Camilla dominated the front pages. Headlines like, "The women holding the monarchy together. From outsiders to anchors. How Camilla and Catherine stabilized the throne. While Meghan rebels, Kate reigns." Harsh. Yes. But effective? Absolutely. And then came the speech. Delivered at a charity gala, Catherine took the stage, not with fire, not with fury, but with poised steel. Her speech, ghost-written but approved word for word, contained one chilling line. "We are only as strong as the truths we confront and the grace with which we carry them." No names, no call-outs, but everyone knew exactly who it was aimed at. The room erupted in applause, and Meghan was watching. Back in Montecito, Catherine's rise didn't go unnoticed. According to sources close to Meghan's team, she was furious but impressed. "She's learning from me," Meghan allegedly told a friend. "She's doing what I used to do, before they told me I couldn't." But this wasn't imitation. It was correction. Catherine wasn't just emulating Meghan's media instincts. She was outmaneuvering them. And in the process, she wasn't just salvaging the monarchy's image. She was slowly becoming its most vital asset. Even Charles began to notice. Here's where the story turns. Insiders say that following Andrew's removal, and amid the Meghan memo fallout, Charles began leaning more on Catherine, not just for appearances, but for guidance. In one private meeting with advisors, when asked about how to handle upcoming press fallout, Charles allegedly turned to Catherine and said, "What would your team do?" That moment was telling, because kings don't usually ask for advice, and monarchs don't usually cede the room. But Charles did, because even he could see what was unfolding. Catherine wasn't just the future queen. She was becoming the monarchy's crisis compass. And with William increasingly absent due to overseas diplomatic obligations and health concerns within his inner circle, Catherine was the only one keeping the ship steady. But with power comes enemies. And not just Meghan. There were whispers inside the palace walls, jealous aides, sideline PR officers, even some of Camilla's old guard, who began calling her the Velvet Guillotine. Why? Because Catherine didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply removed. A slow staffing reshuffle began. Former Meghan-leaning courtiers quietly reassigned. Loyal speechwriters elevated. Social media coordinators aligned with her aesthetic. No blood, no noise, just quiet, surgical transitions. And by the time the palace issued its carefully worded denial of involvement in ongoing media speculation surrounding Meghan and Andrew, it bore Catherine's tone. Not Charles's, not Camilla's, hers. But here's the irony. For all her composure, for all her restraint, for all her rising influence, Catherine was angry, not because of Meghan's attacks, not because of the press noise, but because of one undeniable truth. She had played the game right from the beginning. And still, somehow, Meghan had controlled the narrative for years. Until now. Because with every passing hour, Meghan's leaks made her look reactive. Catherine, she looked unbothered, unshaken, unapologetically royal. But behind that serene smile was a strategy more ruthless than anything Meghan had ever attempted. Because Catherine didn't just want to survive the storm. She wanted to own the calm that came after. And she was getting close. Then the call came. A top royal aide, a man who had worked under 3 monarchs, known for his discretion, requested an unscheduled audience. Not with Charles, with Catherine. When they met, he handed her a manila folder. Inside, evidence, emails, memos, a digital transcript from a private briefing in 2018 involving Meghan, Andrew, and a now-defunct PR firm with known Epstein-adjacent ties. It wasn't criminal. It wasn't explosive, but it was enough. Enough to explain why Andrew dropped Meghan's name. Enough to validate Catherine's instincts. Enough to plan the next move. Because the aide didn't come with a warning. He came with a request. You should see this before it leaks. And decide, do we bury it? Or do we let it bleed? Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because what she said next would change the entire game. What does a king do when the rot seeps into the walls of the palace? When scandal threatens the roof, and power slips through royal fingers like water? He makes a sacrifice. He draws a line. And sometimes, that line is a person. In this case, that person was Meghan Markle. Because by the time King Charles was handed the memo, sealed, time-stamped, discreetly delivered by one of his most senior aides, he already knew. The walls were too thin, the whispers too loud, the optics poisonous. But what he didn't expect was the name on the first page. Not Andrew. Meghan. Again. Let's go back to that moment. Charles, exhausted from weeks of crisis management, sat alone in his private study at Sandringham. The fire was low, the hour was late, and the world outside was buzzing. Media storms, Meghan's subtle jabs, Catherine's ascent, Andrew's downfall. Everything was moving too fast. But inside that envelope was clarity. The document wasn't a bombshell. It wasn't salacious. It was strategic. A timeline. Cross-referenced events. Meetings. Donations. Appearances. Drawn in a simple, devastating conclusion. The Duchess of Sussex posed an ongoing reputational risk to the crown. Not because she was guilty, but because she was entangled. Too many circles. Too many ambiguous connections. Too many opportunities for tabloids to connect dots the palace couldn't erase. And the final recommendation? Written in cold, administrative language. For long-term protection of the sovereign and the firm, consider full formal disassociation from the Duchess of Sussex in all remaining symbolic, honorary, and structural capacities. No correspondence. No involvement. No public linkage. Full severance. Translation? She must be removed. Charles stared at the final line for what felt like hours. Removed. It was such a loaded word. It didn't mean violence. It didn't mean exile. But it meant erasure. It meant pulling the plug on what little remained of Meghan's royal DNA. No more titles. No more courtesy invitations. No more appearances in official family trees. And above all, no more benefit of the doubt. But here's the irony. This wasn't the first time the Crown had considered this. Back in 2021, after the Oprah interview, a similar discussion was held behind closed doors. Camilla had been furious. William had stormed out of one meeting. Catherine, then quieter, had simply said, "This won't end. Not until we end it." But the Queen, Elizabeth II, refused. She believed in restraint. She believed, naively perhaps, that Meghan and Harry would eventually settle. She was wrong. And now, under Charles's reign, the same threat loomed larger. Louder, more dangerous. This time, action was unavoidable. So Charles called a meeting. Private. After hours. No press. In attendance. Catherine. Camilla. A top legal advisor. The palace press secretary. And William, via secure video call from abroad. There was no agenda. Just a single directive written on the whiteboard. Final protocol. Sussex strategy. The air was tense. Catherine, composed. Camilla, cold. Charles, conflicted. And William? Silent. At first. Until Charles turned to the screen and asked the question. Do we move forward? William paused. Then, with a look that betrayed both exhaustion and resolve, he answered. She's already left us. We're just making it official. The room nodded. Unanimously. The plan unfolded with clockwork precision. Step 1. Legal review. Ensure that all honorary military affiliations, patronages, and charitable ties still formally connected to Meghan were dissolved or absorbed into other members of the royal family, preferably Catherine. Step 2. Public framing. Craft a neutral but final statement that clarified the ongoing evolution of the royal family and how not all members remain in alignment with the crown's values and mission. It wouldn't name Meghan, but it would drown her in implication. Step 3. Media echo. Engage 3 major royal correspondents known for sympathetic coverage of the monarchy. Leak select phrases like, "The king believes the family must look forward, not backward. The palace is focused on stability, not sensationalism. The Duchess has chosen a different path, one no longer compatible with royal representation." Step 4. Digital blackout. Purge Meghan's presence from all royal web properties. No photos, no mentions, no redirects. A silent unpublishing. The final touch? Step 5. Personal letter. From Charles. Not an email, not a text. A letter. Handwritten. Delivered by diplomatic pouch. To Meghan. We don't know what that letter said, but palace insiders claim it was firm but respectful. It acknowledged the past, admitted missteps on both sides, and closed with a sentence that felt more like a verdict than a farewell. In the interest of protecting all that we hold sacred, I must finally do what duty demands. I wish you peace, but I can no longer offer you presents. That was it. The door? Shut. Gently. Permanently. But here's the twist. Meghan saw it coming, not because she was told, but because the signs were already everywhere. The sudden legal inquiries from the palace's lawyers, the fact-checking calls to Archwell, the freezing out of any upcoming royal engagements, even ones involving Harry's charities. It was already happening. And the letter? Wasn't a shock. It was confirmation of everything she feared and everything she had been preparing for. But what came next? Not even Charles expected it. Because Meghan didn't rage. She didn't cry. She didn't call her lawyers. She booked a flight. Not to Los Angeles. Not to New York. But to Geneva. And there, she met with a human rights foundation known for publishing powerful exposés on institutional abuse, discrimination, and systemic silencing. Why? That's the question Charles's aides are still asking. Because Meghan didn't announce a new documentary. She didn't post a cryptic quote. She went dark, quiet, but calculated. And when Catherine heard about the Geneva meeting, a single thought crossed her mind. She's not fighting anymore. She's preparing to burn it down. Now, the monarchy had done it. They'd removed Meghan. Fully, formally, fatally. But at what cost? Because while Charles was celebrating a rare win, while Catherine secured more influence than ever, while the press applauded a new royal era, something was happening on the other side of the world. Something the palace hadn't seen coming. A letter. Not from Meghan. From someone else. Someone who had once served the crown faithfully. And who now had nothing left to lose. Because this letter contained names. And one of them wasn't supposed to exist. What happens when a woman who's been silenced, sidelined, and surgically erased from royal history finally receives the one thing she wasn't supposed to see? A letter. Not from the king. Not from Catherine. Not from her lawyers. But from someone inside. Someone close. Someone who had once pledged loyalty to the crown, but now had a different kind of allegiance. To the truth. And when Meghan opened that letter in her Montecito estate, seated beside a flickering candle in her sun-drenched home office, her laptop glowing with unread messages, she froze. Because on the very first page was a name, one she was never supposed to see. And suddenly, all the calm, all the composure, all the measured, rehearsed public silence cracked. The Meghan Markle we saw in curated lifestyle brand shoots and filtered interviews? Gone. What emerged in that moment was the woman who had fought for survival in a palace that fed her to the wolves. And this time, she wasn't just angry. She was ready for war. The letter was 6 pages. Typed. Printed on plain white paper. No signature. No header. Just an address scribbled on the envelope that had been delivered through a third-party courier. From someone who was there. The contents? Startling. It claimed to be from a former senior aide to the palace press office. A person present during the height of the Sussex fallout. Someone who had attended damage control briefings, heard closed-door conversations, and read internal memos most of the world would never know existed. And on page 3, in a list of names from an internal threat assessment, dated March 2021, Meghan saw it. Subject D. 4. Markle, Meghan. Risk: escalation through media provocation, institutional undermining, and alignment with external disruptive narratives. And beneath it? Secondary flag: contact overlaps with subject P. 7. Andrew. It wasn't explicit. It didn't say she had done anything wrong, but it linked her name, directly and bureaucratically, to Andrew's. She was a subject, a threat, a risk to the institution. And worst of all, they had planned this all along. Even as they smiled in Christmas photos, even as the Queen expressed her warmest wishes, even as Charles and William shook hands with Harry at official events, they had already decided to contain her, to monitor her, to remove her, quietly, coldly, and permanently. This wasn't just a smear. This was a protocol. The reaction in the Montecito house was immediate. Staff were dismissed early. Lawyers were called. Harry, reportedly upstairs reading bedtime stories to their son, was summoned with a single, chilling sentence. They did it. They actually did it. And we have proof. He didn't speak for nearly a minute after reading the letter. Then came a storm of pacing. Raised voices. Half-started thoughts. How long have they been watching us? Why didn't anyone stop it? They used you. They lied to us. But Meghan? She was already dialing. Not for the press. Not for legal counsel. But for a media partner. One that had always shown interest in her story. One that had been circling for years. One that had once flown out to pitch a post-royal truth docuseries and left with a polite rejection. Not this time. The partner? Apple. Specifically, an executive in the Apple TV Plus Originals division with a history of producing hard-hitting truth-based exposés. Within hours, a Zoom meeting was scheduled. Within 48 hours, a pitch deck was submitted. And within a week, a provisional working title was born. Protocol D4. But what about the fallout? Because the meltdown wasn't just inside the house. It was outside, too. Media caught wind of Meghan canceling an appearance at a women's tech conference. A private security firm was spotted increasing patrol around her estate. And one anonymous neighbor told the Los Angeles Times, "Something's off. The whole energy's changed. They're not coming and going like usual. It's like they're bracing." They were right. Because this wasn't just another scandal. This wasn't another PR battle. This was existential. Because for Meghan, this letter wasn't just proof of a plot. It was the key to her narrative salvation. For the first time, she wasn't reacting to rumors or headlines. She had documentation. And with that, came leverage. But here's where it gets messy. While Meghan's camp scrambled to build their media counterstrike, another development sent shockwaves through Montecito. A second letter arrived. This one was different. Not anonymous. Not typed. Handwritten. From someone inside Meghan's past royal circle. Someone she trusted once, but not anymore. The letter was only 3 paragraphs long. But one line hit like a bomb. "They never meant to protect you, Meghan. The Queen tried. But the machine needed a villain. And you were easier to erase than to embrace." Beneath it, a postscript. "They're erasing Harry next." The panic that followed was barely contained. Meghan's lawyers contacted Archwell's board. Security was upgraded at every level. And Harry? He made a call. Not to Charles. Not to William. To someone even more unexpected. Princess Eugenie. His cousin. Once close. Now distant. He asked her just one thing. "Did you know about the threat assessments?" Her reply? A long pause followed by, "I heard rumors. I didn't believe them. But now, I'm not so sure anymore." That was all Harry needed to hear. The palace hadn't just targeted Meghan. They were preparing to freeze out his entire line. Back in London, the silence was orchestrated. No responses from Clarence's house. No comment from Catherine's office. But internal panic was real. Because somehow, the D4 memo had leaked. Not publicly. Not to the tabloids. But to the one person who could do the most damage. And Catherine? She knew exactly how. There was only one staffer with access to that particular protocol who hadn't been reassigned. A longtime aide with quiet sympathies for the Sussexes. The very same person she had once warned Charles about. But the damage was done. And what Catherine feared most wasn't exposure. It was reaction. Because Meghan wasn't going to release a press statement, or file a lawsuit, or stage a tell-all. She was going to do something far more destructive. She was going to reframe the entire royal institution through her eyes, through a story they couldn't fact-check, through a platform they couldn't block, through a lens they no longer controlled. And the first trailer was already in the works, set to feature the words D for wasn't just a code. It was a warning. And now, you're going to see why. But what came next would change everything. Because just as Meghan prepared to go public, just as Apple executives began circling, just as Archwell strategists outlined a release calendar, a phone call came. Not from the palace, not from the press, from someone in the UK Parliament. Someone with access to royal funding records, security briefings, and, most damning of all, internal communications logs between Buckingham Palace and the Home Office. They had seen something. Something that tied the Meghan decision to an even darker strategy. One that had nothing to do with protecting the monarchy, and everything to do with neutralizing a narrative. Because Meghan wasn't the only name flagged in the documents. There was another. One the palace had worked hard to keep secret. A name so explosive, it could detonate the entire institution. And Meghan was about to find out who it was.